Hi, everybody. Welcome to Kindred Skulls. My name is Matt Freese. I'm here with my co-host, Nick Olson. Nick, how you doing?
I'm good. This podcast is now officially, unofficially sponsored by Barks Root Beer. So, want to get that in there for
Yeah,
the
I'm
ongoing Vikings Root Beer wars.
I'm going to
Uh,
shout out the local, for me, A Treat root beer. So just got to add another one into the mix, right? But neither of us are pulling for mugs, so I guess it's a
that's the
Barks
important part of
podcast.
our official, unofficial sponsorship. Is
Yes.
no mug. Mug is the Pepsi. It's a Pepsi product, so it's just over sugared, and there's no subtlety to it. There's no vanilla. It's just pure sugar. So it's enticing on the first taste, but this is probably more root beer talk than people anticipated with their favorite Vikings podcast.
Yeah, I challenge you to get through a whole can, right? Like, it's, the first sip may be great, but who knows once you get to the second one. No. Speaking of something that is great, however, how about the Vikings signing Zadaria Smith? Let's roll right into it, right?
Boom.
Uh, Boom. This was something that I think at some point last week we were kind of in a pit of despair, right? Because it was reported that Smith had signed with the Ravens. Basically, all of the other edge rushers on the market had gone off the market. So now we've kind of turned around, and it turns out that we were able to sign Zadaria Smith. It seems like it's a 3-year, $42 million deal with up to $47 million total in incentives. That's $14 million a year with the upside there, at or before the upside. And then, the Ravens' original deal was reported to be something like 4 years, $35 million, which I thought was incredibly low. So he did quite better for himself, and that's why he backed out of the original deal, I believe, when he realized he had a lot bigger market than maybe he originally expected there. It was kind of an interesting dynamic. But, personally, I love the signing. We'll get onto this in a little bit, but he's going to be comboed with Danielle Hunter, who is also going to remain a Minnesota Viking. It appears to have come out in the last couple of days. We had kind of the big decision with the signing bonus, but so it'll be Zadaria Smith and Danielle Hunter, right? We talked about this previously. We're reuniting him with both Mike Pettin and Mike Smith, our, pass rushing outside linebackers coach, who coached him in Green Bay and really brought the best out of him there. So, it'll be a injury prone, or maybe injury prone is not the right word, but both players missed a lot of last season with injury, but there's a huge upside in our defensive end room now, Nick.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's interesting. You talk about what happened with the Ravens, and maybe I'm reading a little bit too much into it, but today, when Zadaria Smith was asked that question in his presser, he started off his presser, Zadaria Smith started off his presser saying, I'm so excited to be back here. It feels like family, back with Coach Mike and with Coach Pettin. So he mentioned that right off the bat. And then when they asked what happened, what went wrong in Baltimore, he said, I wasn't just kind of sure about it, and I wasn't sure, like, I'm grateful for Baltimore for giving me the start, but I kind of wanted to be somewhere where I had the familiarity. So maybe I'm reading between the lines a little bit too much, but I kind of get the impression that, like, once the Baltimore deal was reported, Mike Smith reached out to Zadarius and was like, "Yo, Z, like, we'll beat that offer. You got to come check out our program. We think you'd be perfect opposite Hunter." And he really is. I said he's the perfect fit for what the Vikings need in this scheme, and he is for so many reasons. We talked when we did our deep dive on Donatel's scheme and what the Fangio scheme kind of needs. It's a scheme that doesn't like to blitz because it likes to run these split safety coverages where you're dropping 7 in coverage. To do that, you need to be able to get pressure with 4. And right now the Vikings have Danielle Hunter, and that's kind of it from pass rush. I mean, they signed Harrison Phillips, who should be a great run stuffer. Dalvin Tomlinson is a good defensive tackle as well, but he's more of a run stuffer himself too. Those guys are perfect fits for the gap and a half run plugger kind of guys that the Fangio scheme wants, but they're not pass rushers. So adding Zadaria Smith really gives them a heck of a 1-2 punch, thunder and lightning combo at both edge spots. It's going to be huge for the team. Zadaria Smith is a bigger rusher. He's 275 pounds. That gives him a lot of versatility. He does a lot of his most damage rushing from the inside. He'll kick inside and he'll rush He'll sort of be in the rover role, they called it in Green Bay, where he'll sort of just like walk up to over the center, or he'll rush from a three technique position, stood up over the guard. Does a lot of damage that way, but he's also effective rushing from a wide nine technique. He's got a lot of power. He's got very, very heavy hands. So he's kind of a traditional power rusher, long arms, good levers, but also able, like he's a very skilled technician with his hands. That's probably what makes him most effective as a pass rusher. He's just very skilled with his hands. He's got a great cross chop. He's got a great like two-handed swipe. He can do a swat and arm over to beat a guy and counter inside. So he's got a lot of different things, and he's very good. He gets a lot of immediate pressure just by sort of disengaging, sort of jujitsuing his way past offensive tackles and rendering their punches ineffective, so that he can sort of rip around them or sort of swim over them. So just a very, very talented pass rusher. Led the NFL in pressures in 2019. Had the third best defensive grade among starting edges in 2019. Had the 11th best in 2020, and then missed most of last year with the injury. So that's why they were able to get him at this $14 million number, which is cheap for somebody who I think is a top 15 edge defender when healthy, probably top 10. I mean, he's a two-time Pro Bowler in Green Bay. So just a very, very talented rusher. I think that $14 million is right on the money too, because like Hunter, I think, is right now at 14.4. So they were able to entice him and not get any drama there from Hunter. But like with both Hunter and Zadaria Smith, I think Kevin O'Connell and Kwesi are gambling on getting a lot of production out of two guys who you're getting a discount on because of their health injury. But with all the investment in sports science, maybe we create our own injury luck a little bit here. We get players who, when they're healthy, are worth over $20 million a year. I mean, you're seeing Von Miller get $120 million over 6 years, and he's 3 years older than Zadaria Smith. So these are very, very premium players at premium positions. Catapults the Vikings to one of the best pass rushing duos in the NFL. The only teams I would put clearly above them are probably the Chargers, now that they have Khalil Mack opposite Joey Bosa, and maybe the Raiders now that they have Max Crosby and Chandler Jones, but those are kind of the only two. So I think you could put Hunter and Zadaria Smith up there with almost anyone. So really exciting move. Does a lot of things for the scheme, does a lot of things for the team, does a lot of things to convince me. I was not feeling too great about this defensive roster, but you had somebody like Zadaria Smith to the picture. They still need some corners. They still need some more pieces, but the front seven right now looks pretty darn solid. So I'm thrilled about it. Matt, I don't know if you have any other thoughts there.
Yeah, no, it brightens up the outlook of the team quite a bit, I think. And this kind of rolls into, the decision the Vikings had to make prior to the beginning of the league year with the extension of Kirk Cousins, right? So when you extend Kirk Cousins, you're signaling that you're trying to run it back and you're trying to have the best team that you can possibly this year, right? And it's a question we had in terms of, well, look, everybody who's a star on this roster is getting a year older. Maybe that's a good thing for somebody like Justin Jefferson, but it's decidedly not a good thing for Harrison Smith, Eric Kendricks, a lot of the highest paid players on your roster, Adam Thielen as well. So you're really banking on some sort of improvement on the offensive line, which bringing Kevin O'Connell in should do. And then you looked at the number of players that were leaving on the defensive side of the ball, right? And we still have issues in that realm, right? Particularly at corner. The three corners who played the most snaps for us last year, or well, maybe not Breland, maybe Dantzler was in the top three, or at least two of the three are gone, right? And we have nobody behind them. Right, so we need to add at least two corners, maybe a third corner still, right? So we still have some depth issues, but this really solves problems up front, because you can expect Daniel Hunter, who was still a question mark for a very long time until Sunday. It seemed like the Vikings were actively trying to trade him if they could get enough in return for him. It sounds like they didn't get as much as they wanted in return for him, and they decided to keep him on the roster instead, which I think is a great decision. And then you're still looking at DJ Wanham starting on the other side. Now you get another star player to go across from Daniel Hunter, and I think that's what Zadaria Smith brings you. To give a comparison for Zadaria Smith, he rushes a lot more like Everson Griffin does, but I think even at his peak, Griffin at his peak maybe had more speed and more ability to bend the edge a little bit. Zedarius is definitely more of a powerful player, but the explosion and the power that you see from Everson Griffin at his peak, Zedarius can even beat that, right? And I think the handwork is phenomenal too. As you said, the ability to rush moves. So you can kind of also stagger, you have one power rusher as an edge rusher, and you have one more of a speed rusher and more of an athletic guy in terms of Danielle Hunter, right? Zadarius is very explosive in a straight line, but Danielle is like a freak of freaks in terms of athleticism in the NFL, and he wins with speed a lot more. So I think having that dichotomy where you don't just have two speed rushers who can get pushed upfield all the time, it allows you to layer your rushes. It allows you to get after the quarterback more effectively when you kind of have that variety there. I would still look for more depth at the defensive end position, right? Because we have the top tier guys. Another concern is their recent injury history, right? The $14 million, I think, is a bargain if you get Zadarius at his peak, but I believe he's 29 years old. So, by the end of the contract, he'll be in his early 30s, and typically players are declining at that point. That doesn't mean that he's not going to be a very good player for us for the length of the contract. It just means that $14 million, probably when it's all told, when we look at it at the end of it, was about right for the average, right? If he has a more valuable year this year and then declines a little bit moving forward. So I think that's a pretty good number there. The other thing I like a lot, and this is something we talked about in the Donatell deep dive that we did, is his ability to move around the line of scrimmage, right? The Broncos did that a lot with Bradley Chubb when Bradley Chubb was healthy. They kind of used him as an X factor player, and the Packers did that. And we have the Packers, half of the Packers coaching staff, right? Half of that Packers coaching staff in terms of Pettin and Mike Smith, moves Zadaria Smith around, and they called it like Z Green Bay or something like that, to get him one-on-one matchups against guards and that sort of thing. Similar to some stuff we did with Everson Griffin, to bring it back to that as well, right? So I think that's really interesting for Zadaria Smith, and it's a great combo to have as your lead two rushers. So yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the sum total of my thoughts there. I think it's a great addition, and I think it actually helps the Vikings become competitive, and maybe more competitive than they were last year on defense, right? At least it's a step in the right direction, because for half the year, when we had our edge rushers for the first half of the year, the defense was actually very good last year. And then it all fell apart once we stopped being able to get pressure on the quarterback consistently, winning those one-on-one matchups, which we were simply unable to do. One last thing I can add here is I went through, looked at some PFF data, right, for 2020 and 2021. If you look in terms of pass rush productivity and, just how many sacks guys were getting, even like when Danielle Hunter, Everson Griffin, and Yannick Ngakoue were on the field, they were far outpacing everybody else on the defense in that time frame, right? And that was a total of like 16 games between those guys, maybe 1,000 snaps, maybe 700-800 pass rushing snaps. They far outpaced everybody else who, had a total of like 3,000, 4,000 snaps on the other side, right? So if we can get a solid 600 snaps from Zadaria Smith, or I guess this day and age, maybe you're expecting 700-800 from a primary edge rusher from both Zadaria Smith and Danielle Hunter. That's going to go a long way to helping our edge rush productivity.
Yeah, and just a few final, to put a bow on this, thoughts. When we talked about team needs a few podcasts back, we talked about like, oh man, it sure would be nice to have like a JJ Watt on this team, or a Calais Campbell, or somebody who's like an edge defender, but he could also kick inside and play a 5 technique, or play like sort of snug up on the tackle, or even play a 4-eye, or kick inside to the 3 technique on passing downs. And that's exactly who Zadaria Smith is. He's comfortable in a 2-point stance from wide 9, but he can also kick them inside. And that's true of his run defense as well. So like if you're playing base downs, I'm comfortable kicking Zadaria Smith inside to a 5 technique or a 4-eye if you want to. And have him be one of the defensive linemen alongside Harrison Phillips and Dalvin Tomlinson, and then bring back out DJ Wanham, who's maybe a little bit lighter and more of like your 3-4 outside linebacker, and that's a way to get your best front 7 out there even when you're in your 4-3 base package. So he has that kind of versatility, and that's true of his run defense. I will say he's more of a pass rusher than he is a run defender. He's not quite the extreme splits that Yannick Ngakoue was for yes. the Vikings, but and he does. It's because he's got a very high motor, and he loves to sort of penetrate and shoot gaps, and so that's kind of more of his game, rather than necessarily sort of patiently waiting in his gap. And that's kind of what he's at his best when you let him be an attack dog and sort of shoot things and get after guys and sort of find a way to shoot into gaps and get past blocking attempts. So he's a really talented rusher, but Other than his injury health, you could probably knock him for run defense a little bit. He's not like a liability, but he's not one of the best in the NFL there. And he's just from studying his tape a little bit, he's just such a powerful. He will literally bulldoze guys over, like onto their butt into the ground. And he's just got very, very heavy hands. He comes with good leverage, and he stays low, but he's got such long arms, and he's really able to explode into contact. And that's kind of how he builds everything. He's able to counter out of that. He's able to win to the edge. He's not like the bendiest guy in the world or the most explosive, but he's able to sort of use his own momentum and use the player's momentum against them. So he's a very, very talented and technically sound rusher, and a very smart rusher too. Like he clearly is a big tape hound, knows his specific opposing tackle or opposing guard's weaknesses. So I think that's kind of how he's put together 2 Pro Bowl seasons and one of the best pass rushing grades of anybody in the NFL over the last 3 years, which is why I say he's like a top 10 pass rusher. He feels a little underrated because with what he's put up in the last few years, you could put him up there with anybody in the NFL. But clearly his contract is not going to be on the same position as the Bosa's or the Myles Garrett's of the world, to say nothing of even just the Chandler Jones or the Von Millers, who got much richer contracts despite being 3 years older. So if you can see him return to form, this is not just a good player for the Vikings, but this could be a difference maker for the Vikings in the same way that Danielle Hunter and Eric Kendricks and Harrison Smith are. So it has the potential to not work out, but if it does work out, this is the sort of move that elevates you from maybe we're a wild card team to, hey, maybe we can make some real noise in the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. And one kind of last thought here, I saw an interesting question that somebody had asked, and it was, would you rather have 2019 Everson Griffin or 2022 Zadari Smith? Obviously, that's not a question we can really answer yet based on his injury history, but it kind of got me thinking, and I really think that, if we get that 2019 Everson Griffin level of production, he had 8 sacks that year, but Danielle Hunter on the other side had 14.5 sacks, and I think that sack number kind of goes one way or the other based on how lucky the guy gets, right? It's kind of who gets there rather than, necessarily one player played so much better than the other. And that year, Everson Griffin was still very good, even with that 8 sack number. So I think if we get that kind of production, but it entices a 14.5 sack, that kind of high pressure year, I think Zadaria Smith and Danielle Hunter were 1 and 2 in pressures in 2019. Smith had 91 and Hunter had 83, I believe, in that season, where, a lot of times if you win a rush in Zadaria Smith and you collapse the tackle back, you can scare the quarterback over towards Danielle Hunter's side, right? Or vice versa. If Hunter gets a guy, Zadaria Smith could come underneath on a power rush, something like that. So, if we get that level of play that we got from 2019 Everson Griffin, I think this is a slam dunk win, and he still has the potential to play above that level as well, based on what he did in both 2019 and 2020. Honestly, he played better than Griffin did in 2019.
Yeah, great player. So, I saw some Vikings fans sort of getting a little anxious that the Vikings were just running it back with a worse roster. I think we kind of hinted a little bit, but I think the Vikings were planning on something like this, and I think this is sort of the keystone free agent signing, and it won't be the last one, but I think this will be the major difference maker. I mean, healthy Zadaria Smith is a star, so that changes, I think, the outlook for the 2022 Vikings in a way that Jordan Hicks or Harrison Phillips, no shade to them, but Zadaria Smith is just a different level of player, Pro Bowl caliber player. So and
so talking about that roster, talking about running it back a little bit, but talking about maximizing our potential for this year. Right, and part of that comes into the Danielle Hunter situation, right? So he had a roster bonus that was due. I don't know. The Schefter said it was due by Saturday. The standard reports were it was due by Sunday. It doesn't really matter. Both of those deadlines have passed. His $18 million roster bonus has been guaranteed, and the Vikings have actually already decided today, concurrent with the Zadaria Smith signing, I believe, to get themselves cap space, to convert that into a signing bonus. So it saves $13.5 million on the cap for this season. It adds the difference there, which is, something like $4.5 million each year for the next 3 years in void years, which means he'll have a higher cap hit next year, something in the teens as well, and then a dead cap hit in 2024, of over $10 million, assuming the Vikings don't get an extension. I mean, I think the hope for the Vikings is that they're able to get an extension done with Danielle Hunter next offseason if he's able to get back to form and play very well. And then they have him under contract and they don't have to worry about that dead cap hit, in the 2024 year or something like that. But we'll have to wait and see, obviously, for that. I mean, I'm super happy the Vikings have decided to keep Danielle Hunter on the roster. I think losing him would have been a huge blow to the defense, right? We saw what the defense was without any edge rushers. Last year we saw what DJ Wanham was able to do, and it was not very good as a starter. It's still possible he's able to develop, but given the amount of time that he's played, I'm not banking on that, and I don't want that to be my main strategy going into the season, right? DJ Wanham is a starting edge rusher for this team, so being able to retain Hunter and then sign Zadaria Smith, so you don't even need to really concern yourself with that at all. Maybe he's a rotational third guy. Maybe you even are able to bring in another guy that you like more than him as that third guy, was a huge key for me. I didn't think the Vikings were going to be able to get much for him if they tried to trade him based on the injury history, or at least they weren't going to be able to get a first round pick, which is what I think it would have taken for me to be able to be willing to move off of Hunter, right? Because you need somebody with like a high level of talent to be able to replace him, and you simply don't get those guys in the later rounds. I think teams have wisened up to those really good raw athletes even, and we've seen them start to go earlier and earlier in drafts. So at the end of the day, I think it's a great move to keep Hunter.
Yeah, we really went from having no edge rushers to having both Hunter and Smith. Because remember, it was only a few days ago where people were like, is Hunter going to be cut? And that was kind of something I heard rumblings of for a while from like credible people too, not like just like people pulling stuff out of nowhere. But like Courtney Cronin reported that like a cut was something that was possible given this $18 million roster bonus. And I saw Jason Fitzgerald, who's my favorite cap analyst out there at Over the Cap, said, he guessed that the most likely outcome given this $18 million looming roster charge was that Danielle Hunter would just be straight up cut. So really exciting to see they were able to retain him and convert that to a signing bonus, because what that means is that Hunter is here to stay. We can't trade him anymore because it would accelerate the dead cap. So it wouldn't even save the Vikings any money. Well, it would save them like a couple million, I think. And if they traded him next year, it would save them a little bit more. But it doesn't really make it advantageous. Right now, with the way his cap hits are now structured with the signing bonus proration, he's kind of untradeable. So that means Hunter and Zadaria Smith are kind of going to be building blocks, at least for the next 2 years, I think, for the Vikings. Hopefully more than that. It does signal to me that they weren't able to come to an agreement on an extension. I kind of get the impression from the trade talks, if I'm piecing things together, I don't have any inside sources, but how I read the situation is that they were trying to negotiate something and they were just too far apart on money. Maybe Kwesi was like starting out from 20 and they were starting out from 30, and with a hope that maybe you meet in the middle and tack on 3 years at $25 million each or something. But it doesn't seem like they were able to come to an agreement on a number. Either way, this keeps Hunter on the roster, and maybe he treats it like a prove-it year. And if he goes out there and he looks like an all-pro, fine. We'll pay you $30 million a year if you're going to put up that level of production. You're worth it at that point. And I'm fine playing that. If it's a year later and, in 1 year you can put away all those injury doubts, into ancient history if he goes out there and plays like a top 5 edge rusher. So, and he's capable of doing that. So if he goes out there and earns a contract, that's great. And if he goes out there and he gets injured again, well then, good thing the Vikings didn't give him an extension, I suppose. So I think it's kind of win-win, and it guarantees that, Hunter and Zadaria Smith are going to be the two building blocks for this team for at least the next couple of years, I think. So I think all that's really exciting. One other interesting aspect to this is now that the roster bonus is paid out as a signing bonus, it's all going to be paid out now. So, whereas before the roster bonus was very cleverly constructed that they could sort of claw it back, or it was paid in installments so that like Hunter could not hold out, and if he held out, he would not get it paid. Now it's paid out in a signing bonus. So if Hunter gets it now, in theory, you could have a holdout discussions, and he could get into give me my extension, and it gives Hunter a little bit more leverage as a player. At the same time, I think though I get the impression the way it's structured, Zadaria Smith gets just a little bit less money than Hunter. The Vikings investing in the team a little bit more. I kind of get the impression that we're not headed towards a holdout. That Hunter has embraced his new situation, the new scheme, the new coaches. So hopefully it doesn't hit that point. But it is interesting that's another layer to this too. Is that the way the roster bonus was structured was like Hunter had zero leverage. Now he has a little bit leverage back. So that's part of it too. But either way, you're getting two edge rushers, two top 10 edge rushers for the price of basically one, because they're both underpaid. Nick Bosa is like over $25 million a year right now. Danielle Hunter and Zadaria Smith combined are averaging $28 million a year. So you're getting two top 15, arguably top 10 pass rushers at an extreme discount. The only question is, can they stay healthy? And it seems like this team is thinking maybe they found a market inefficiency here where they're able to create a little bit of their own injury luck with their robust sports science program they're borrowing from LA. So a lot of interesting cap details with how it all works out, but they were able to finally borrow from the Danielle Hunter money stand and create the space to make this Zadaria Smith signing happen.
Yeah, speaking of over the cap, I just went there to check out the top edge rusher contracts. TJ Watt, I guess, got an extension and now leads at over $28 million a year, which is what we get for the two. Joey Bosa, Nick hasn't gotten his second contract yet, is at 27, so he was the high watermark previously. So obviously two
for the price of one.
Yeah, two for the price of one if it works out. And just to tie it back there, like I agree with you that I don't think Danielle Hunter had a whole lot of leverage. He especially didn't have it in terms of holding out based on the way the roster bonus was constructed. He had to play for the Vikings this year, but I do think the contract gave him some leverage against signing an extension when he didn't want to. Right, so he can treat this year as a prove-it year. He was going to get paid $26 million, I don't remember what his salary was, but he was getting the $18 million in cash this year. So next year, if he really wanted to, he could force the issue and hold out because he's not actually losing out on all that much money if he did. So it does give him leverage to have another prove-it year for him before he gets a potential extension. And if he's able to stay healthy this time, it'll be substantial money on that extension because he's still 26, 27 years old. So it's kind of crazy how young he is still every time you look back at it. So, we've hit on both of the edge rushers. Those are the major ones. We also had a couple of other restructures. We restructured Harrison Smith, a simple restructure, changing, salary or whatever into signing bonus money that just spreads out the cap hit. And then we also restructured Adam Thielen. The details of the Adam Thielen restructure aren't out yet, but they did end up saving money. Obviously, there was a signing bonus conversion in there, and there might have been a pay cut as well. Nick, could you take us through the details of that a little bit more from what you expect?
Yeah, so Harrison Smith is pretty simple. He had an $8 million roster bonus due, I think, a few days after the new league year, so a little earlier this year. They just converted that $8 million roster bonus into signing bonus. So Harrison Smith signed through the next 4 years, through 2025. So they convert that $8 million into signing bonus. That means you pay the $8 million now, but it only counts $2 million this year. And the other three installments of $2 million count for $2 million in 2023, 2024, 2025. So that creates $6 million of cap space because you take that $8 million and turn it into $2 million, even though you're paying it now. It's just an accounting trick for the way the NFL CBA allows you to do that when you pay out signing bonuses. So that was the Harrison Smith deal. The Adam Thielen one's pretty interesting. They actually wound up giving him more cash this year, but at the expense of what I presume are pretty big haircuts to his future salary. What they did is they changed. He had like a $12 million salary. They reduced that now to just under $5 million. So creating, $7 million in space, but they paid him like a $9 million bonus. So that $9 million gets spread out now into signing bonus. So you pay out a little bit more in cash, but you pay less. It lowers his cap hit by just under $5 million total. With the way the accounting works out. And then in future years, this hasn't been confirmed, but Jeremy Fowler of ESPN suggested that in 2023, he's going to get paid $5 million guaranteed. That becomes guaranteed for injury, that becomes fully guaranteed at the league year. So I'm interpreting that as his P5 salary, his total salary, that, his salary went from $13 million to $5 million. And then I would also assume that his 2024 salary would also be similarly reduced from what was $15.4 million previously to probably around like $5 million again. So that would give it this typical structure of an aging vet who's exchanging future earning potential for more guaranteed money. So, he was on the books for $15 million every year. Now he's on the books for like $8 million a year, but it's all guaranteed money, or it's more guaranteed money, or he's getting it guaranteed for injury. So, in total, that would reduce his cap hits from this year about $17 million, $18 million in 2023, and almost $19 million in 2024 to this year, $12 million, next year $12 million, and 2024 $10 million. So a lot more palatable numbers. You're saving $5 million this year, and you're saving a little bit more than $5 million next year, and almost $10 million in 2024. So that's kind of how it works out. Granted, that isn't guaranteed. It's possible that when Jeremy Fowler was talking about his $5 million guaranteed for injury money in 2023, he could have additional salary on top of that that's not guaranteed. That would be a little weird to report it that way, and it would not exactly fit the structure. But all that's just to say, kind of all we know right now are the signing bonuses and the total guarantees of the deal. So I get the impression we know that it creates $5 million of space right now, technically a little bit less, and we know that there's a $9 million signing bonus. What we don't know is how much cap it's going to save in 2023 and 2024. So a nice I think win-win deal there for Thielen. Thielen gets a little bit more cash now. He gets a little bit more guarantees. He gets a structure where he can palatably play out his career in Minnesota. But meanwhile, the Vikings kind of get a transition roadmap off of Adam Thielen as he transitions from, an All-Pro in 2019 to kind of a Pro Bowl caliber player, but somebody who's a little more injury prone as he's in his 30s, to somebody who will eventually be, kind of like a Larry Fitzgerald type wide receiver 3. I think his game's going to age gracefully because he was never really like a superstar athlete, like a 3 Sigma, just going to beat you with his quickness or his speed. I mean, he's athletic, don't get me wrong, but he gets so many touchdowns just because he's such a crafty route runner, and he's great at the catch point. So I think all that's going to age well for him, but over time he's eventually going to transition into a wide receiver 3. I think this gives the Vikings and Thielen kind of a set path for how that'll work out in the year's future. So kind of an interesting structure, and hopefully allows the local boy to finish out his career a Viking.
Yeah, so that's about as good of a breakdown of the Thielen contract as you're going to get until you're actually allowed to read the language of it, right? Like, not guaranteed that that'll be exactly what it is, but hopefully they were able to work something out. And I think at the end of the day, what this tells us is that Harrison Smith and Adam Thielen are going to retire Vikings if they want to, right? Which I think is great for both players. They're two of my favorite players on the team. Been here for a long time, so I'm happy to see them retained, right? Rather than
totally. As much as the heartless Bill Belichick's of the world would have traded them like last year for a second rounder, and maybe that gives us a 1% better shot at winning a Super Bowl. At the same time, I also like cheering for Harrison Smith, Adam Thielen, and part of me is willing to sacrifice that very remote a 1% chance to see Adam Thielen finish his career as a Viking. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
He's basically living the dream that all of us had. Grew up watching Randy Moss. He's like the same age as me, and now he's going to finish his career as a Viking. Such a cool story. So very cool.
Yeah, man, it's awesome. So the one other major piece of news, at least in terms of a starter that the Vikings have signed, is Jordan Hicks, the linebacker from Arizona. Hicks, started his career maybe with the Bills, I think, and then he was with the Eagles for a while. He dealt with injuries early on, and then ended up with the Cardinals, where he's played over 1,000 snaps in 3 straight years. So he got a little bit of an injury prone label, and then he turned it on and hasn't missed a game since then, essentially, in the past 3 seasons. So he's been a reliable presence there. To me, this says that Anthony Barr isn't coming back, right? We're signing a starting linebacker. I don't think you sign 2 really starting linebackers when in base defense you only need 2, right? Last year we went in with Barr, Kendricks, and Vigil, right? We can get a Nick Vigil type for cheap on the open market somewhere. So Jordan Hicks, he doesn't have the frame that Barr does, right? Barr has the massive, really long arms, 6'5", 250 pounds. Hicks is more of a Kendricks frame. And at the combine, he came in 6'1", 237, I think, which is roughly the same dimensions as Eric Kendricks. I think Kendricks was 6'1", 238 or something like that. His athletic testing was pretty good. Obviously, he's older. He's over 30 at this point. So he's probably not quite the athlete he once was. But when you watch him on tape, I think he's still a quality starting linebacker. He's a smart player. He doesn't really lose gap discipline very often. I think he keeps that very well. I think he can hold up in coverage, right? He's not going to be your Eric Kendricks level coverage player, but there's a reason Eric Kendricks was an all-pro, and it's because of his coverage ability, right? I think you can still task him with what this defense is going to ask linebackers to do, which is chase running backs to the flat, right? I think that's probably one of the most difficult assignments you have of linebackers in the system, and I think Jordan Hicks can do that based off of what he profiled as in Arizona. So at the end of the day, for me, I like the signing. It's a solid starter. I don't think you should need to be investing so much in linebackers in the modern NFL, right? You need to invest in guys who don't make mistakes at that position. And if you have a guy who can erase players in coverage, that's great, but I don't really think you need two of them roaming around there, right? And we have one of them already in a healthy assuming Eric Kendricks is healthy, right? That's going to be the caveat with his entire Vikings defense, is assuming everybody's healthy all season. It's looking pretty good in the front seven, at least. So, I like the Jordan Hicks signing a lot. I think it fits in well. I think it was about $5 million a year. So it's not, it doesn't kill you against the cap. Any further thoughts there, Nick?
Yeah, my initial reaction was actually pretty negative, because I remember when I watched Patrick Peterson's tape back in 2020, I remember just thinking both Arizona linebackers just awful. And as I watched more of his 2021 tape, I realized part of that was just like a scheme thing. 2020 Cardinals ran, I think, the most cover one in the league, or maybe the second most. Which is, that's going to have your linebackers match a lot on receivers and have to carry them, and that's not something you can ask Jordan Hicks to do. And for the record, the Cardinals asked the same thing of Devondre Campbell, and he looked awful in Arizona that year. He goes off to Green Bay and Joe Barry's scheme, another Fangio tree scheme like Minnesota that will be this year, and he has an all-pro season. So there's some reason to believe he'll do better, I think, in Minnesota. I think he has limitations, athletic limitations at this stage. He used to be really athletic. I don't think he has the long speed anymore. But that's fine. The thing about this whole Fangio scheme is your linebackers really don't have to do that much. They're kind of set up. You're asked a lot about the guys up front who have to do more to cover multiple gaps in the run game, and your edge rushers really have to be able to create pressure because you're not going to be blitzing very often. And your corners have to be able to run with guys downfield vertically, and your safeties have to be able to. But your linebackers, they're just kind of drop to your hook zone, drop to the flat, and just keep things in front of you. And take you're set up basically to succeed. So I agree with your characterization. I think Hicks is a starting level guy. I was impressed by his gap discipline. You watch the Cardinals games against the Rams. The Rams throw so many crazy things at you, but he never takes the bait. He's just very, very disciplined. Shoots to the right gap regardless of how many guys there are in jet motion or polars or fullbacks doing whatever. So he's a good player, and he's also good. He knows how to win around guards. And centers, so he's not, he's at an 80-pound disadvantage when he's coming up against a guard who's pulling or climbing to the second level, but he knows how to disengage their arms or swim and stack or shed and go around them or duck around them, weave around them, make plays at the ball. So he's got a good nose for the ball. He's a good blitzer. He's not necessarily in the way that Barr was, where he can just overwhelm you, but he does have some pop in his hands, and he is able to. He's got a good motor, and he's mostly got a really good sense for timing. So I think the way he fits really well into the Donatell Fangio scheme that we're expecting is he'll be really good for fire zone blitzes, where he knows exactly which gap to hit and at which angle to hit to sort of get a clean, unblocked rush at the quarterback. Or if he gets into a one-on-one with a running back, he kind of knows how to lower his shoulder and create havoc in the backfield. So he's a good pass rusher. I'm excited to see that. I don't think he has the athleticism to sort of do what Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks did, where they mug the A gaps, but then buzz to the flat and cover the running back. Or I don't want to see Jordan Hicks covering a wheel route upfield. I think that's where he can kind of get exposed. But if you're just asking him to drop to the hook or drop to the flat and keep things in front of him, that's fine, and he can do that. And he can be not a liability in coverage, and I think he can actually add some plus value as a run defender and as a pass rusher. So, I think it's a downgrade from Barr, definitely, but given what the scheme does and what they ask of him and how you can always just ask Kendricks to be the guy to cover the running back instead, this is fine. Perfect. $5 million for competent starting linebacker play. That's a huge upgrade over Troy Dye or whatever, who are going to be a massive liability in the run game. So, I think it's a move that makes sense.
Yep. Absolutely. Fully on board there. So moving on from Jordan Hicks, we have two other outside signings that we've gone through. The first is Johnny Munt, who was a blocking tight end from the Rams. We kind of stole him away a little bit. I guess we gave him about a 2-year, like $2.5 million deal or something like that. Jordan Rodriguez of The Athletic, I believe, reported that the Rams were kind of expecting him to just go through the first wave and then sign him for the minimum. But Kevin O'Connell, Wes Phillips seemed to like him enough that they gave him a little bit more than that to entice him to come over. I think the deal only has $200,000 guaranteed in it or something like that. It's not really a cap implication thing because he's very close to the minimum, if not at the minimum salary. So it's really not that big of a deal against the cap. But they got a blocking tight end that our coaching staff is familiar with, so they must like that. And then Austin Schlottman, our offensive line coach, is familiar with. So he was an offensive lineman for the Broncos. He got some play, undrafted in 2018 or 2019. Has been with the Broncos since that point, but I believe we also got him on a minimum deal. So I'll be honest, I didn't go back and watch any Austin Schlottman tape or really any Johnny Munt tape. So do you have any thoughts on those two guys, Nick?
Yeah, I mean, Munt actually is valuable because I'm not sure we really have anybody who fits more of like the blocking tight end, inline, wide tight end role right now. I mean, Irv Smith can do it. It's funny, Irv Smith came out and he was like so tiny for a tight end that you kind of assumed he would only be a move tight end, but he actually kind of, in limited snaps, but he blossomed into somebody who's actually a really good inline tight end too. But past that, it's kind of Zach Davidson, Ben Ellefson, the guys who you probably don't want.
Is Ellefson still under contract?
I think he is. I think Luke Stalker, and I know Chris Herndon is a free agent, but yeah, anyway, the cupboard is bare. So,
yeah.
And Zach Davidson's more of a wide receiver / punter than he is an inline tight end. So, the options are limited. But yeah, Munt, I mean, the fact that Wes Phillips was his tight ends coach and loved him, wanted to bring him over, and the Rams wanted him back, probably suggests, he can do some good things. And, he graded out very well as like a blocking tight end in LA on like very limited snaps, but it's I'll take it. So that's a plus. Schlottman, I'm not going to think too much about him. It was like a vet minimum signing, so it's kind of like your Dakota Dozier utility swing back up. The fact that we hired the Broncos offensive line coach and the Broncos running back coach probably gives them some familiarity, and maybe this is somebody who they think has the potential to be more than just like a solid backup, give you a floor in case something happens to one of the interior guys. But I don't think he's in line to start or anything. I don't think he's in line to be the answer at right guard or anything. So, I wouldn't get too worked up about him.
Yeah, absolutely. To go back to Munt a little bit, the Vikings had a role for that in their offense in the past. Ellison didn't do much last year. I believe he eventually got injured, but he played 80 snaps in limited games. And then you can add on Stalker and Herndon, who are both free agents, played over 300 snaps combined, right? So that's, approaching 30% of the snaps there. And the Vikings really don't have a tight end behind Irv Smith. Obviously, we expect Irv Smith to take a starting role and be able to do that. But like you mentioned, he was a solid blocker for what he was, but he wasn't really an inline tight end blocker. And surprisingly, Munt is only like 235 or something like that, but he was really effective as a blocker in line and effective in that role. So I expect him to be able to do that going forward as well, despite maybe not being the biggest guy in the world. In some cases it's a leverage thing and that sort of thing. Anyway, most tight ends in the NFL, you're kind of outweighed by the guy you're across from anyway. So if you're really good with leverage and you're really good at the kind of wrestling aspect of blocking, right? I think you can get that part down, and the technique aspect of blocking, you can get that part down still. like you said, Schlotman, I think that's a good point. He's a depth player, right? He's somebody our coaches are familiar with. He's a depth player. He's the Dakota Dozier role, where if he's starting for you, you're probably not in a good place with injuries, but maybe he can cover the gap better than a Dakota Dozier has in the past. So those are those two guys. The final two signings that we have that have happened in the interim is we tendered Greg Joseph, and I believe he signed the tender, and then we also re-signed Jordan Berry. So we have both of our specialists back from last year. I don't know if this means they're going to be our specialists permanently, but we at least put the money out there to bring them back, and maybe we'll see competition moving forward. I think that they'll be fine moving forward. Like, they weren't, Greg Joseph certainly wasn't the best kicker in the league. He was probably a run-of-the-mill, middle-of-the-pack kicker. His field goal percentage, I think, was relatively good. That tends to fluctuate a little bit year over year. His extra point percentage was a little bit low, but he also had a very high percentage of his kicks and in touchbacks, which I think is what we were aiming for, and it's something the team wants. So as far as, he's got that kickoff leg that helps you a little bit in the field position game. Well, I don't know. It's kind of 50-50 because there are teams that do a really good job of not allowing touchbacks and stopping the other team short of the 25-yard line, right, on a consistent basis. But depending on what your team wants, he has that leg to give you that. And he made a number of long kicks for the Vikings, right? You remember the game winner against the Lions with very, very little time left. There's other situations there too where he really showed through in the clutch. And then there were a couple where he wasn't clutch, like against the Cardinals. So, he's certainly not the worst kicker we've experienced, in the past 10 years. So I don't hate it. Jordan Berry was all right as a punter. I thought he had some consistency issues towards the middle of the season or maybe going on towards the end of the season. But, he's fine too. I don't think, I don't love breaking the bank for either player, but also you can't necessarily rely on a rookie to come in and perform right away at those positions.
Yeah, they're both fine, but they also both have no guaranteed money. Joseph actually gets more money than I would have expected. He's a lot more than a vet minimum. The lower round tender is like almost $3 million, but none of it's guaranteed. So maybe they rework a vet minimum contract later in the year, or maybe they give him more camp competition. If either of them loses a camp competition, they can be cut without any money. So
yep.
They're both fine, and that's fine is great because it means that you have a floor, and if somebody comes in better, you can always upgrade, and it's you don't have to pay anything for that. So. Fine to have the specialist figured out.
Man, that's actually brutal that restricted free agent tenders aren't guaranteed for restricted free. Sorry, this is a very in the weeds topic, but if you are an undrafted free agent or you have under 3 years of service time in the NFL, when you get to the end of your contract, you become a restricted free agent. And teams can tag you with an original round tender, which in the case of somebody who is undrafted or cut by their previous team, I believe, is the minimum. And it's just a right of first refusal where another team can sign that player to an offer sheet and you basically have the ability to match that. But if that's not guaranteed, that's rough for those guys because they don't really have the freedom to go somewhere that will pay them money and they can get cut right away if... Now, granted, somebody would have to offer that money to them, I guess, but it's just a rough situation. Anyway, out of the weeds a little bit, let's jump over to kind of what the Vikings might be doing in free agency moving forward from here. I believe we have opened up a relatively significant amount of cap space, probably about 10 million based on some of the other extensions, because the Hunter basically takes up all of what the Zadaria Smith contract will cost us in terms of cap space this year. They have made an offer, I believe, to Ryan Bates, who's an offensive lineman from the Bills. He's a restricted free agent. The right of first refusal applies to him. And he was visiting a couple other teams. I believe the Bears and the Patriots were the other teams that were interested in him as well. There are other players that fans have been clamoring for. I know J.C. Treader got cut by the Browns. I know people are very excited about him. And then obviously the cornerback room, we've talked about it all the time, needs depth. Patrick Peterson's still out there. He's vocally wanted to come back. Bryce Callahan's still out there. He makes a lot of sense to bring over from the Denver defense. I believe Kyle Fuller's still out there from the Denver defense as well. And there are a couple other options. For you, Nick, do you have anybody in free agency that you're currently targeting? Any specific needs? Like, what's the minimum you think the Vikings need to do for the rest of the free agency period?
A minimum is tricky because anything that they don't address in free agency, they could also try and address in the draft. The problem with that is most rookies also kind of stink a little bit. So, like, even Trey Waynes was not a very good rookie cornerback. So it takes time for these guys. I would say they probably need to add at least one cornerback, though. They can't be done. At the very minimum, they have to bring back one starting cornerback. They could probably get away with saying, Oli Udo showed some promise, and hey, we drafted this Wyatt Davis guy, and we want to have a genuine competition there. Maybe they lose out on the Ryan Bates competition because the Bears come up with a crazy offer because they got Justin Fields and they have basically no offensive line to protect him, or maybe the Bills get a right of first refusal, so maybe the Bills just say, fine, we'll match that, whatever, we think he's worth it. So it's easy to see them losing out on Ryan Bates. So I can see them, and especially Kwesi being like an analytics guy, not prioritizing the interior offensive line as much. Cornerback is a position I don't think they can ignore. The one guy I would add to your list is Trey Waynes, who is not just a familiar face. I mean, he's got no connection to the Vikings anymore, but he is kind of a very good fit for a quarters defense just because, Wayne's issue was always he's a little tight-hipped, so he's not going to be able to, like, cover guys and cover one man across the entire field. But if you just give him a quarter of the field, let him run vertically, I mean, that's all he did at Michigan, or was it Michigan State?
Yeah.
Where he's got like sub 4.4 speed, and he's got great size. He can really get in there in the run. So for a Fangio system where the system is based so much out of quarters, doesn't ask your cornerbacks to match inside and carry guys horizontally across the field as much. I think he's a great fit for this scheme. So so long as we're taking gambles on injury-prone guys who you can maybe get at a discount, maybe Waynes makes sense there as well. That's in addition to, I think, Patrick Peterson, Bryce Callahan, even Kyle Fuller could make a lot of sense there too. The other guy I would mention, who I think is a fit, it's kind of I think J.C. Tread is probably outside their price point right now, especially after they signed Zadaria Smith. But one guy who I think could make a lot of sense is Eric Flowers, who most people probably remember as like the draft bust at tackle, but who's actually been a really good guard the last couple of years. He's posted some of the best pass protection grades, and now that he's kicked inside to left guard. So you'd probably have to move him over to right guard, but or you can move Ezra Cleveland, who was a right guard his rookie year. Either way, you can make it work out. Flowers, a big athlete, great size. He grades better as a zone blocker than a gap blocker, so I think he'd be a scheme fit. And I think you could probably get him at a bit of a discount right now too. Wouldn't count against the the compensatory pick formula either, because the Commanders cut him. So those are some guys who I would keep an eye out for, but that said, Zadaria Smith was their big premium spender, so now they actually do have to be a little bit more reserved, and they're probably priced out of the J.C. Treaders or the Stephon Gilmores of the world for now.
Yeah, absolutely. At the cornerback position, I don't think they can make a big splash. I'm hoping that they can make a medium splash, right? I don't know what Bryce Callahan is going to be worth, but I think that's just an absolute no-brainer for them to bring him in. He made $6 million on his last contract, but based on his performance in his last contract, injuries and that sort of thing, I don't think he's going to be there. K'Wan Williams, I think, from the 49ers got signed for like a $3.5 million a year deal, like 2 years, $7 million or something like that. And he's a very solid startable player. So I would expect Callahan to be in a similar range to that. Patrick Peterson's another one that's a good question. I mean, I think we both believe he played pretty well last year, just based on what we've seen from him. So, but I don't think he's going to command the $9 million that we paid him last year, to be honest with you. Like, I don't know if the perception on him's that high. And I think if he was going to get that, somebody would have offered it to him already and he would have accepted it. So if he can come back at like a $6 million a year range, maybe a 2-year, $12 million with some void year shenanigans or whatever to keep his cap hit a little bit low, I think that's a totally reasonable deal. I like the Trey Waynes edition. Like you said, Michigan State is one of the like original quarters teams. What they did with, I think Mark D'Antoni's the basketball coach. The name escapes me, but Pat Narduzzi, who's the Pitt head coach, was the defensive coordinator there for whoever their head coach was at the time, where they were one of the kind of people who brought quarters into prominence, right? Along with Gary Patterson at TCU before even the NFL was doing it, right? They were the guys who brought that to prominence there. So those Michigan State corners know how to play quarters. Hopefully that'll translate to what we've got. And the Vikings do need that speed option. Obviously Waynes has dealt with injuries recently, so maybe, you're a little bit leery about that as well. On the offensive line, I said today, I would rather sign 2 corners and no offensive linemen than sign an offensive lineman like JC Tretter and sign no corners going in. I think we just need the corners. Well, first of all, we need warm bodies, right? We literally only have 3 on the roster, so we need warm bodies, and you're not going to acquire all of that through the draft. But I don't really trust any of the 3 that we have on the roster to start, and there's only one I even kind of trust to start, right? Cam Dantzler, I kind of trust. I think we need to add 2 starters at the position. I'd rather start Oliuta at guard. I'd probably rather start Wyatt Davis as a guard, even if we have no idea what he looks like, than start Chris Boyd or Harrison Hand at corner based on what we've seen from them over the past 2 seasons. So at the end of the day, we really need to hone in on that cornerback position and figure out what we're going to do there. There are options left that you can sign and I think are startable once we sign them. But I kind of think we did also shoehorn ourselves into picking a corner at 12 at this point based on what we've got. Like, I think if you're mocking the Vikings and you're not taking a corner in the first round based on where the defense is at, based on what the Fangio defenses have done historically, and based on who we've got on the roster in terms of talent, I think you're wrong if you're not mocking those guys there. I guess sneakily we might want to bring in another safety, right? Because we lost Xavier Woods. He got a decent contract. We only have Cam Bynum and the rookie contract guys that we have outside of Harrison Smith there. So it'll be kind of interesting to see what they do moving forward with that position as well.
Yeah, I think that sums it up really well. It's sort of funny. The Vikings definitely need a cornerback, and it also plays out well where I think one of the top 3 cornerbacks will be available at 12.
Yeah.
And so I think it kind of matches up there. And I think the Vikings will be able, this is an incredible edge class, but the round 2 edges that'll be available will also probably be pretty incredible too. And so, if Ojabo falls all the way to round 2 because of his torn Achilles, you can pick him up there. Well, now you have Zadaria Smith, so that helps offset that a little bit. The cornerback class is really good, I think, at the top, but I think it falls off a little bit too after round 1. So I'd be pretty happy with the Vikings winding up with any of those top 3 guys. But it at this point it makes too much sense unless Gardner, McDuffie, and Stingley all go before 12, which seems unlikely at this point, especially as we're starting to see some of the tackles class rise, some of the quarterbacks rise even. Wouldn't be shocked if Pickett and Willis go in the top 10. I think there'll be corners there at 12. So I think the Vikings are actually pretty well set up.
Yeah, absolutely. And, with the first wave of free agency over, we might get into a little bit more draft prep or something like that, talking about guys that we're looking into here on this podcast. But I think we've kind of wrapped up all of the moves that the Vikings have done pretty well here today, Nick. So any thoughts to add on the Vikings before we wrap it up here?
No, looking forward to more Vikings fun. So free agency is always a blast. So I'm sure the Vikings aren't done yet. In fact, I kind of get the impression so much of their moves right now so far have just been getting their own cap situation in order. Now they have the spending money, and now they're starting to spend it. So Zadaria Smith is the biggest piece of that, but I think there are going to be multiple moves coming. So excited to see what they do in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, and I'd rather hit the second wave of free agency where you can get kind of values than be the Jaguars and spend $18 million a year on Christian Kirk, spend all that money on Darius Williams, spend all that money on everybody else at the positions where you're paying a premium for guys who are quality players, but you're obviously overpaying them, right? You're going to rue that a couple years down the line, even if it improves you marginally in the first season. Even if it improves you quite a bit in the first season. Like, the Jags are a lot better team right now than they were a week ago, right? But they're still not a real contender, right? Like, they didn't add premium talent, I don't think, but they paid a premium price for it. So I'd rather sit and wait a little bit, and at the end of the day, it worked out okay. Now, the question for the Vikings overall is, was it a good idea to extend Kirk, right? Like, because you could have taken a different path, but given that they took the path, there's not much you can do now, and you kind of got to go this direction that they've gone so far. So I think it's been a solid it's been a good process once you made that decision to try to run it back and try to go all in, because that's what you're doing when you extend Kirk for a season.
Yeah, totally agree. I'm not sure I would have extended Kirk. I think they got a discount. I mean, we talked about it at length in our Kirk episode, and then when that extension was announced. Not sure I would have been on board with that, especially given some of the trade offers that have been rumored. But given that they're doing it, I think Zadaria Smith and some of these other guys they brought in are sort of the perfect way to go about trying to see if you can get the most out of Kirk in 1 year. So we'll make the Vikings, certainly we'll make the 2022 Vikings a lot more palatable to watch than like a tanking team. So excited to see that at least.
And oh my goodness, I forgot one thing. The Vikings also re-signed Sean Mannion today. That was the biggest news of the day, obviously. Lots of people up in arms about that. All I have to say is, if you think that the Vikings re-signing Sean Mannion is a problem, you actually have a problem with the fact that the Vikings re-signed Kirk, right? Like, if Kirk Cousins goes down in this situation, you're screwed regardless, right? You would need to look for a quarterback outside of the organization. We've kind of talked about how we don't have a lot of faith in Kellen Mond, but like, when you're paying Kirk Cousins that money, you're signaling to everybody that you're screwed if he goes down. So you want to support him as much as possible, and that makes him comfortable in the quarterback room to have Sean Mannion there, apparently. So I'm totally fine with it from that perspective, right? If you don't like the move, it's mostly just because you don't like Kirk.
And it's very little guaranteed money, and if Mond can't beat out Mannion in camp, then that says more about Mond than it does about Mannion. So I get that we're all traumatized from watching that Week 17 game last year. It was excruciatingly painful, but I'm not going to get too worried about vet minimum signings in March.
Yeah, so I think that's going to wrap it up for us, guys. This was the Kindred Skulls podcast. We are unofficially sponsored, apparently, by Barks Root Beer. Also, overthecap.com, your perfect resource for all your cap needs. I use it. I seriously constantly go on that website. It's like multiple times a day at this point. It's pretty bad. But no, I'm Matt Freese. You can find me at Fries Football. He's Nick Olson NFL. At Nick Olson NFL. Nick Olson is his name, obviously. We are Kindred Skulls. You can find us at Kindred Skulls on Twitter. You can find us on YouTube by searching for Kindred Skulls. We're also available in podcast form on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Leave 5-star reviews only. And Skull Vikings.
Skull, baby.
Another first-round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first-round corner wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another first-round corner wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all cheer on behind. And we'll score.